Okay, I'm going to make a start, and we can just keep track of people who are arriving. I just want to start first of all by saying welcome to everyone. My name's Julie Stevens. I've not had the privilege actually of being part of any of these events before, just because of other diary commitments. So it's really great actually to be part of this afternoon's one. We're doing a team effort this afternoon. I've got Rebecca Cosgrave and Anne Hudson, who you can see there in the pod. And they will be they will be talking us through sections linked to the assessment offer and early years updates. Many of you will have been to these sessions before. Oh, sorry, we've also got Kath Powell, who, if you've been to these sessions before, Kath has presented quite a number of these. She's not a presenter this afternoon, but she's sitting in the background, and she's going to be supporting the chat throughout the afternoon, particularly around secondary and Key Stage 4 GCSE discussions. Yeah, welcome everybody to this event. This is release 2 of this half-term's trio of events for leaders, and the focus this afternoon is going to be around assessment. Now, I know many of you will have come out last half term and you'll have seen Rebecca and Anne at those events that were led by Amanda and Kath. And we're not going to be repeating those. We will be looking this afternoon at further updates, guidance and research that has occurred since reopening. So we'll only be looking at documentation within the last couple of weeks to help you to, work through some of those documents, to look at some of the statutory and non-statutory elements linked to assessment and the guidance that's coming out, and also to look at some of those good practice models. You'll see here that there's a further session next week, and Kath and Helen are going to be part of presenting that session to you. I hope everyone got the resources ahead of the session, and as you know, when we're delivering these sessions, we don't go through every single slide, but we're going to pick up just on some key points from those materials that were sent out to you earlier this week. But since, in true DFE style and in education, the world of education, since those were sent out, we have had a few more updates around maths assessments from NCETM. So I will spend a little bit longer in those parts of the session, just flagging up some of those. But again, you'll have all of those links and that information as a result of this session anyway. So as I said, this session is aimed at assessment, and it's really looking at, as I've already said, some of that key guidance, some key documentation and updates, looking at some good practice. But like all of these sessions, what's really key is an opportunity for you to be putting things in the chat, to be, asking questions, clarifying, sharing ideas and practice. And as you know, as a result of this session, you will get all of that chat as well. And I know people who've attended before have said that actually, those discussions that happen in the chat really add to and so beneficial to supporting the way forward in your schools. So please do use that chat as we go through. What we'll do is follow a similar format where we will work our way through all the information first, but then provide time for any questions at the end. But please, don't just save your chat till the end. Do contribute as you go along. And Anne and Becca will be following that chat along with Kath, and if there's anything that's missed and they feel I need to flag that up, then we'll build that in as well. Okay, I'm going to start, and often in these events we start with the youngest children, but in a moment we're going to have a look and start with some of the older pupils in our schools. But I just wanted to flag up a few pointers which will have come out of last week's session, which just show where assessment sits within that operational document, which you will have unpicked in greater detail at these sessions that were running last week. And this just, you can see in those points there, just shows where assessment is picked up in relation to that guidance. And I think the key information and the key messages that is coming out at the moment is that it's a clear focus in terms of the diagnostic and formative assessment, and looking at how we can best use assessment at this time to identify what it is that children have learnt, but in a way that is showing us what have they learnt from what they've been taught rather than from what they have missed. And that is a really key message, and that will come through quite a lot this evening actually, is that when we're looking at the assessments we're making, whether they're formative, diagnostic, or whether they're summative assessments, how are we putting a focus on getting information about what it is that children have learned as a result of what they've been taught, rather than something that tells us what they have missed. So how do we know, what their strengths are? And also another message that will come through, and this comes through quite strongly in a moment in Key Stage 4, is how are we making sure that no child, no pupil is disadvantaged by the assessments that we're using. Now, last half term, as I said, some of you may have attended this session led by Amanda and Kath with Becca and Anne. And very much the message there was, in terms of remote education, was, catch it when you can in terms of that assessment. And that could be through, facial expressions of children or lack of smiles or celebrations that you're getting back from some of those, where you were doing any live sessions or had any other interaction with children. Really, the key messages now in terms of all the updates that are coming through is it's that return more to a systematic approach to assessment. And by systematic, that doesn't mean summative. It just means having a clear system in terms of being clear about what are we continuing to do with assessment. It's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You will all have processes and systems already for assessment. But how are we going to best use that assessment now to really look at, those strengths, but also those losses that children, have come back with. So I just wanted to sort of flag that up with those points there, that, that's a key message that's running through all the guidance. So we're going to start with some of those oldest pupils. And I'm not going to, at this point, really focus too much on Key Stage 5, but I'm going to have more of a discussion around Key Stage 4. But obviously, for those of you who are secondaries in the audience, if there were any points you wanted to flag around Key Stage 5, then please do. To be fair, some of these things, as you'll see in some of those first points, do include Key Stage 5 and AS and A levels as well. There's a lot of discussion going on at the moment, and for those of you who follow social media, it's absolutely full at the moment in terms of particularly Twitter around discussions around assessment at Key Stage 4. The document links you've got there, you will have seen before, but they have been updated. As you know, the situation is the same as last year, that is teacher assessment at Key Stage 4. I think what's key about the key messages from certainly the documents on that slide, and when you look at any discussions that are happening, is that whatever your approach to assessment is going to be, that, and I'm going to sound like a stuck record, I think, this afternoon, but it is about making sure that that system is transparent, so that pupils and families know exactly, how what evidence, when is going to be collated and looked at in terms of informing teacher assessment that will then ultimately lead to a grade being awarded at the end of that. How is that process going to make sure that no child or pupil is disadvantaged in any way? So it will take into account what I've just said already, really. It will take into account the experience that those pupils have had over the year. So, some children will have been in school for the whole period, some will have been at home, some will have had a combination. And how will that be reflected in terms of, the evidence that will be available for those pupils, so that we're making sure that those pupils are being assessed against the learning that has taken place, linked to what they have been taught, rather than assessing areas that they've missed, and ensuring that we take into account the different experiences that those children pupils have had. And therefore, when we're thinking about what evidence would look like, that could look quite different for different pupils according to the situation that they have been in. I think another key message that's coming through is about how teachers feel confident that they've got it right for pupils, and how school leaders and schools are supporting those teachers to feel confident that they've got it right. And that can link with some internal moderation, working with colleagues, and lots of you will already be doing this. This isn't anything new, but I think it's really important at this time to make sure that teachers feel they've got that support and feel they've got it right, because if they're feeling that, then that will instill confidence in the pupils and in the families. So thinking about, some of you will already be in more formal partnerships with other secondary schools. So how are you using that, which you will be, to support those discussions with teachers around their assessments and how they're making those decisions about grades. Where you're not in formal partnerships, many of you will have informal partnerships, and again, how are you using some of those links that you already have to support discussions school to school as well as in school. Now, we know that there is going to be some more guidance coming, and we know also that exam boards are going to be producing some descriptors as well to support. We're still waiting on that. We've had a quick look just to see if anything has come out, and it hasn't, though it did say that it should be things should be coming out in March, so it is still watch this space. In the documents that you've got linked to there is some guidance, and there are some supports as well that are quite useful. So making sure teachers are aware of some of the things that are in those in the documents that I've flagged here. I think also thinking about what worked well last year and how can you use that in terms of what things could work well again this year and what things might need tweaking. That's a similar guidance when we're thinking about those more vocational qualifications as well. And the first couple of links here, pretty much the guidance in relation to assessing and awarding grades and qualifications linked to those subjects and and awards is very much the same, that it really needs to take account of what those pupils have experienced, and that it shouldn't disadvantage them, and it should be based on what has been learnt and what has been taught. And again, it should be around where it's not possible for some of those awards. In some cases, some of those awards will usually involve a test, that what will be in place instead of that test. And there is also the suggestion there that for some courses, testing would still be appropriate. So I think again, it's just making sure that it's that transparency again. How are we reassuring pupils and their families of that process, and how are staff developing their confidence again in making those judgments? I'm not going to refer very much to that last link, which is around the sample tests. Some of you may be involved in being asked to carry out some of those sample tests for pupils in year 11. But you will have had letters about that. But that was just to flag up for those of you that may be in that position. That guidance is really helpful and explains why you've been selected and the process that will be happening. I hope. Oh, we've got a question here from. Is there any guidance on what to report to parents in our end of year report?
I'm just answering that one, Julie.
Oh, thank you, Becca. That's lovely. Thank you, Cheryl. Becca's on the case. Thank you. If there is anything that any secondary colleagues would like to respond in the chat about that, then please do. And I know Kath is in the background, and equally, if there's anything you feel is key. I think just before we move on to Anne and early years, just two things really. I think first of all, it's really making sure how will teachers be supported. And also, if as secondary leaders you feel it would be helpful for us to have a group of you together to talk about this further and to provide further support, again, just drop that in the chat, because we're happy to organise just a group where we can get you together and we can have further discussions about supporting this. Okay, so from some of the oldest pupils, an assessment, to some of the youngest pupils. And I'm going to pass over to Anne Hudson now, who's going to just talk through some of the key headlines and guidance linked to assessment and early years.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, the key messages remain the same, with the disapplications running, if needed, until August the 31st. And again, we've got the guidance there that says when it comes to finalising the EYFS profile assessments, the guidance came out in January to say that teachers need to use their best endeavours to complete the EYFSP for children, if at all possible, and provide that information to parents, which ties you in to the expectation around reporting to parents, and to share that information with year one. Again, there's no statutory moderation visits taking place, and there's no data collection. If you want to move on, Julie, because it ties in for me, we are aware that the early adopters of people who've chosen the new EYFS reforms, they've heard that there aren't any exemplification materials to use. So we have been supporting those early adopters with our EYFS sessions, where we've discussed personal, social, emotional communication language, and currently this week maths, just to enable them to get a feel as to what other early adopter schools in Devon are doing in order to help them to finalise their assessments. When we're talking about meeting their existing requirements, and that final statement where they say it's not reasonable for providers to do nothing when it comes to providing that EYFS curriculum, from personal experience from talking to 20% of teachers in Devon schools during the past two weeks, they are definitely not doing nothing when it comes to getting those children back into school, doing their minute-by-minute formative assessments. They're getting to know their children really well, which then takes me into the next slide, Julie, whereby they are, and these are quotes from teachers that I've worked with. On March the 8th, they were telling me that children have settled back into the rhythms of routines in the day. They're excited, they may have been anxious, but they were really coming back ready, willing and able to learn, really demonstrating their characteristics of learning. I wondered how long would this be maintained. I've spoken to the same teachers this week, and they've used words such as they're constant together, a little bit tired in some cases, but their nervousness as such has worn off, and their concentration has improved. And then just in conversation, what are our teachers doing? They are prioritising the prime areas of learning with that focus on wellbeing in the first instance, rebuilding the synchronicity within their class. They are really focusing on adult-child interactions and really thinking about communication and language, and a focus on literacy. When it comes to what was mentioned in the earlier slides about early reading and phonics, one of the positive messages seems to be from the teachers that I've worked with, that many have maintained that progress with remote learning and home phonics, and actually they feel that parents are better placed to support their children's phonics, and many of the children are at a similar stage in phonics at this point in the term as they would have been in previous years, because remote learning and the systematic teaching of phonics does work well. They have identified gaps and mentioned children, disadvantaged children and children with SEND. But actually, when I said, how are you going to think about that curriculum? They've said, we are still going to continue to offer a broad and balanced curriculum. And that quote was, if we don't, we'll not make our children's worlds bigger. And then finally, someone said, we're going to continue to embrace the EYFS curriculum, as the more you offer, the better the outcome. So it's been really positive when it comes to the EYFS and the teachers that I have worked with. When it comes to finalising their profile assessments, I've just taken some statements here from the handbook as a ready reckoner for both early years current profile and the early years adopters, thinking about things. Evidence can be any materials, knowledge, sources, anecdotal incidents, anything to do with parents. Remembering those words such as best fit, not having to have mastery of all. Best fit doesn't mean that the child has equal mastery of all aspects of the early years, of the early learning goals. Myself and the early years team, Babcock Early Years consultants, are always available to answer any questions by email. Should any questions like this happen, we've got our briefings and we've got extra additional sessions planned, linked to moderation in the summer term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. And there is a question in the chat as well for you, if you wouldn't mind answering that, from a school in Torbay, from Suzanne.
If that person would like to email me personally, and then I can look into it, because we do work with Torbay sometimes, and I do liaise with the person in Torbay. We have had teachers, because now there's so much cross local authority, I have had teachers from Dorset join. So I should think that would be a strong possibility.
Thank you, Anne. And Rebecca's just put Anne's email address in the chat, and it is at the end of the PowerPoint as well. So if you just drop an email to Anne, that'd be lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Becca. Thank you, Anne, for that. Okay, I'm going to move on, and I don't want to spend too long on these first few slides linked to maths, because these were slides that you've had prior to the event. But the NCETM has produced an awful lot of things recently around supporting assessment in maths. The slides that are in here are ones that have been released in the last sort of 2 to 3 weeks. I'm going to sort of move on really quite quickly to some of the additional information. So, you know, this one I think you've had before. You've had before the session. But I think, you know, for a teacher who's inexperienced, for a teacher who's new to a year group, you know, really understanding some of the things they can be looking for in terms of knowing what children are learning and remembering and understanding. This is quite a useful, I don't like the word checklist, because it shouldn't be a checklist, it shouldn't be working through this, but it's ideas for how can teachers really understand the knowledge and understanding that children are bringing to maths. And there's some really nice pointers there on that slide from the NCETM. The next 2 slides really are around, you know, when we're thinking about assessment, a lot of assessments that we do in maths are around talking to children and getting children to explain and reason and talk to each other. And one of the things that, you know, we know that some children have lost is that engagement with other children to have those discussions. So from an assessment point of view, how are we going to develop children's skills and confidence in their oracy again, in what NCETM call, you know, the mathematics communities, in ensuring that they've got the oracy skills in order to be able to have those discussions, to then facilitate teachers really understanding and knowing what children can do and have learnt. And there's some really useful information that the NCETM have flagged up linked to the benchmarks report that just gives some useful guidance around oracy and how it supports learning, and gives some really nice examples in there of what that might look like, and also some really clear impact measures in terms of the impact that children have who have that quality oracy education and how that impacts on themselves as learners. But I think certainly, you know, with some children, getting them back to that level of confidence, particularly in those discussions around maths, that's going to be part of that assessment journey, because until children are confidently doing that again, we possibly aren't able to fully understand what it is that they are, they have learned and remembered. These are the, oh, sorry, just to flag up there that Ruth has just flagged up that there is further support sessions around diagnostic assessment in maths, and you'll see there are some dates there in May and June that you can still book onto. These are just some sort of messages from releases that have come from NCETM in the last few days. They did have a curriculum prioritisation in maths document before, but they've updated that, and there's some if you haven't seen this, there's some really lovely materials in here to support teachers in assessment of maths, and then how that links to curriculum planning. And there's a really useful flow chart talking teachers through that process. And then there are some useful sort of templates to support teachers in how they are going to be prioritising areas of maths from year 1 to year 6. The other materials that's come out recently as well as from EEF, there's a really interesting and very detailed, actually, an extensive blog from which I'm not sure is a blog. I thought my understanding was so many words in a blog, but this is more like a research paper to me, but I might have got that wrong. But it's a very useful blog around gathering evidence for assessment, and it talks about these the big 5 questions as part of that, which I've just put on this slide. And I think this is a really useful tool for particularly maths leaders as well, in terms of where are we with assessment? Are all teachers confident? What impact has the journey we've had this year and last year in terms of implications for assessment, and how we get that assessment, and how we make sure we're measuring what children have had access to rather than what they have missed. So if you haven't seen that blog, there's very extensive guidance, but these 5 key questions I think were a really good starting point for discussion. And the final slide for maths is around, again, some further updates. Some of you may have seen, they have a lot of intervention and research papers. They have just updated some of the guidance in relation to their improving maths in Key Stage 2 and 3 from the EEF. And there's some really, they identify the 8 key elements that will support children in improving in maths. And there's, again, some really useful guidance in there around using assessment to build on existing knowledge and understanding. Okay, I'm going to pass over to Becca, because some of you may be aware, well, hopefully you're all aware that there's been consultation going on, and Becca's been working really hard, meeting with various groups of leaders over the past few weeks, along with Anne, to look at support that schools may want in relation to assessment. So I'm just going to pass over to Becca, and she's just going to go through a few points with everybody.
Very quickly, because I'm really aware of the time that you for questions. So key thing just to stress here is when we're looking at the assessment proposal that came out just before half term, we're really in the summative zone here. We're in the zone of trying that sort of cut that we might be taking at the end of the year that we want to try and help you to use as diagnostically as possible. But this is about what we might do at the end. I've put me myths up there on the screen because mea culpa, I think the way that proposal document was worded wasn't as clear as it could be. And I've had loads of conversations since then to try and clarify. But these points are really, really important. Particularly stressing the fact that if any of you do want to engage with any of the resources we're providing or the guidance we're providing, it's all optional. All parts of it, engaging with it at all. But also just a few key points to stress there around the fact that there won't be any holding of data by the local authority, and that there is absolutely no expectation of how, if schools choose to use previous papers to support their summative assessment, how you choose to do that. So that's just a couple of things that I'm sure you're very capable of reading for yourselves. Just more interesting, possibly, feedback so far. So we have had both formalised and informalised meetings with head teachers over the last few weeks, and obviously really grateful to the heads who've responded to the survey. Just to sort of let you know where we're at so far. So to date, we've had 93 responses to the assessment survey, and you can see there around the sort of mid-80s of you are interested in those pre-populated sheets. So that's a good level of response there. What's changed is that we're now providing those pre-populated sheets for any old SATS paper from 2016 to 18. So lots of you said we don't want to be restricted to doing one. We want to do different ones. We've had a very mixed response to the idea of comparative data, and in a nutshell, we've knocked that on the head. So we will not be offering that opportunity for schools to submit data and receive comparative data back, because it's just not valid or useful. So we're not doing that. And we're working really hard at the moment at trying to support conversations around transition into year 7. And on the whole, most of you are very positive about POBL. Just to say, if you have not yet had your POBL account activated, if you've got any problems with that, please get in touch, because lots of schools are finding it really useful. So we met with a group of 9 heads last week. Thank you, those of you that are on the call who were part of that group. And these are the sort of issues that were fed back from them. Lots of concern, particularly around year 6, about the usefulness and the workload issues, and I think those are really valid concerns, and ones that need to be mediated at your own school level in terms of value coming back for the amount of work putting in. I think what I really took from that is that there was quite a strong appetite to be a little bit more creative and to try and come up with some new ideas, but an understanding that we're very limited in time. So the 2 key messages that came out from there were around the need to really look at what information would be useful at transition, and whether it would be possible to provide some kind of sort of learning passport document that would enable primary schools to be passing on information that captures what the child's learning behaviour is like, rather than just sort of very simple numbers on a page. So our next steps now, just to say on that, I think lots of people are really quite happy about using the EYFS pre-populated sheets, the year 2 sheets, and thinking that information will be very useful to them. Next steps, I'm working really hard at trying to get some conversations going with secondary. I've got a meeting with Phil Randall coming up next week to talk about how we can really find out what will be useful, and to try and put some guidance in around transition, including that wider learning type thing. Just to say that the initial assessment survey is still open, and we will be sort of revamping that following tonight's meeting to simplify it, narrow it down, to try and encourage more schools to participate and let us know if they're interested in any of the pre-populated documents that we're providing. We are going to be providing further information to schools early in the summer term, including the programme of moderation events that Anne and I have been working on today, so you'll know exactly what you can access. Just also to say, the NCTM evaluation standards, criteria, prioritisation guidance that has just come out, we're also going to be looking to see if we can provide some support for schools in terms of pre-populated sheets that would enable you to really summarise and analyse the outcomes if you use those teacher assessment criteria. So that will be another offer, I think, that will be available to you to try and support alternatives for you in terms of assessing maths, particularly at the end of the year, if that is useful. So I think that's it from me, Julie. I'm very, very happy to take questions on that, and hopefully if you've got any, please feed them into the chat.
Thank you very much, Becca. And as Becca said, do feed these into the chat. I've just got a couple more things, and then I will open it up for any more chat that people feel that they would like to add before we finish. I just want to flag up just another piece of another blog actually for me, EF. I think they are the blogging champions at the moment in terms of information coming out. But just to say, there is a really useful blog that's come out recently by Alex Quigley there, and I just thought this was a nice summary slide actually for the afternoon. In that it just explains how important the role of diagnostic assessment will play, as we all know, in you know, that recovery and that, you know, moving children's learning on. And I just thought I just picked out some of the key bullet points from there, and I think, you know, that you know, that sort of just clarifies that, you know, that children have had a variance of experience, and that it is really key that you know, there's not going to be a one size fits all. You know, at the moment it's going to be very much looking at how our assessment reflects the experiences that children have had, in terms of the information that we're gathering and the way in which we are assessing. So I just wanted to flag that up. There's a really useful case study actually there around a year 7 pupil as well, which again could be applied to any year group of pupil, and it just shows, gives some examples of how diagnostic assessment were used for this particular pupil and how it went on to impact on his learning. So we're pretty much there in terms of input. I've just drawn together just a few summary points in terms of, as a result of the evening, some of the key things you might want to take forward, consider. And I've also just put a few additional things in terms of secondary, because obviously there are a few key things as well around transition, and Becca's already, you know, touched on some of those as well. So really, it's
Could I just say one more thing? Sorry, I meant to say, and I completely forgot. Which is just say, if any of you are secondary colleagues or are involved closely with your secondary colleagues and would like to be involved in conversations around supporting transition and sort of feeding into our next steps, I would love to hear from anybody who is interested in working with us to try and get something really effective working across the county. So please, anybody who's interested in getting involved in any way, please get in touch with me.
Thank you, Becca. And on the final slide there, you have got the contact details. I've put Ruth Trundley from the maths team on there as well. You've got all the contacts for people that you may want to contact as a result of today. I just want to say thank you. I hope this afternoon has been useful, and it's given you some further clarification, some further food for thought, some time to reflect in terms of assessment and the journeys that you are on at the moment. I'm just looking to see if anyone, I can see Rebecca is typing in the chat at the moment, but I'll just sort of pause just for a few moments just to see if anyone wants to raise any more questions through the chat before we close the session. I think the key thing is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, you have systems in place. It's about adapting those systems in view of some of the experiences and making sure that we are, you know, and I said I'd sound like a broken record, but I'll sort of finish as I started, you know, making sure that we are assessing what children know have been taught and not what they've missed out on, and recognizing that some children will have made some gains as well. And how do we build in opportunities to know what those gains are as well? And that might be in areas that, you know, surprise us, or, you know, go beyond, you know, some of the curriculum expectations. But I'll just pause and see if there are any further points. Anne and Becca, are there any further points that you would like to raise?
I don't think so. No, not from my point of view. Just really, really keen to hear from people if there are any questions or issues, particularly around the assessment proposal, or any further ways that we could support you with that sort of end of year point.
And I know Kath is sitting in the background. Kath, if there's anything you want to put in the chat, I can see there are a couple of people typing at the moment.
Hi, Sam. I'll just pick that one up from a general point of view. I think that is entirely your choice. That's your call to make. As Julie said, there's no point sitting children down in front of some kind of assessment where you know that they will fail. because they haven't been taught that material. So I think, yeah, absolutely, you do need to be thinking about what have you taught, what are your key focuses, what assessments are going to give you that information. And I think if you're taking that sort of approach this term, then you're probably going to find that by the end of this term, you've got a really strong idea of how much of the curriculum you've been able to cover, whether there are key areas and gaps. So even if you were wanting to use any old previous papers, you might want to be selective from within there. With my English hat on, I think from a reading point of view, because reading is not a content-heavy curriculum area, it's really about thinking about whether children might be able to tackle all or some parts of a paper like that, whether it's an NFER paper or a previous SATS paper. But in some of the other curriculum areas, yeah, you're absolutely going to want to be assessing what you've taught. Demelza, yes, there will. In fact, Anne and I have been planning our events this afternoon. So either at the very end of this term or beginning of next term, we'll be probably, hopefully by the end of term, we'll be sending you out a programme of events that you'll be able to participate in using Pobble for supported and peer moderation. Yes, and there's also going to be some more training from Pobble, which will be coming up in the beginning of April, and I will make sure that information goes out alongside the moderation information. And yes, Kate, after the summer term, no, it won't. So the free access is only up to the end of August.
And can I just also add just to that around the end of year assessment, that absolutely, you know, that is your decision. And what you will then think about is, are there any implications? And clearly you've identified those areas that you think are the priorities and are going to be those areas that you feel are going to make the biggest difference for those children moving on in September to be as confident as they possibly can be with the next stage of their learning journey. But obviously, how are you making a note somewhere of those areas that weren't a priority? And has that got an implication then for, you know, some modification that might need to happen next academic year in relation to the curriculum? So if some objectives, which they won't have been, haven't been covered, what implications, if any, has that got in terms of that next teacher and the knowledge and information the next teacher may need in terms of that those pupils having that prior knowledge in relation to the next year's curriculum? So I think, you know, some way of you know, teachers making a note and having those transition discussions so that teachers are aware, you know, these are the objectives that we didn't cover, and therefore, you know, that the next year's teacher recognising any implications. And I think that's where, you know, discussions transition as well between primary and secondary phase, you know, that again has that that knock-on effect, doesn't it, in terms of gaps that children may still continue to have, or elements of the curriculum that are not covered as thoroughly as they may have been previously, that may then impact on children's readiness for Key Stage 3. Okay, lovely.
I think, yeah, someone's
I can
still
just
typing.
see Anne's typing, I think.
It's torture, isn't it? You can see somebody's typing and they're just sort of waiting with eager anticipation. Brilliant. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, those moderation sessions will be round about the end of June, the middle to the end of June, so don't worry. I
think it's worth saying as well that the focus of those sessions is not about judgments. It's about looking for evidence in children's writing, working with colleagues to be able to evaluate what you can see in children's writing. And yes, obviously we will be talking about, you know, what's that telling us about that child overall, but the focus is very much around really just getting together to look at writing, look at what it's showing us, look at what we're learning from it, and look at how that helps to inform the sort of judgments that we make at the end of the year, but also that information, as Julie said, that we pass on to the next teacher, because it's all about information. That's what assessment's about. It's all about good information, and information is power if we know we can do something about it.
Well, I can't see anyone else typing, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to Rebecca and Anne in terms of being able to facilitate not just coming to the session, but the information and time they've put in ahead of this session. So I thank both of them for that, and to Kath for being able to sit in the background as well. And just a big thank you to all of you for for attending this event. I wish you all well with the rest of the week. Is it 14 working days now? No, it's less, isn't it? It's less. No, we've
How
got
many
less now.
hours?
How many hours? How many days less? I wish you all the best for the rest of the term. I know a number of you will hopefully be joining our event next week, and there'll be information sent out to you by the end of the week, linked to that session. But I wish you all a really good end to the week, and I sound as if it's already Thursday or Friday, and I keep forgetting it's only Wednesday. It's thrown me that this event is a Wednesday rather than a Thursday. But I wish you all the very best, and if there is anything you want to raise, or any questions that arise as a result of this session that you haven't thought of, then do email the appropriate person, and we will get back to you. But thank you all very much, and take care, and hopefully you're all going to log off now and enjoy a bit of what's maybe left of the sunshine.